And while long-term data preservation is a matter of different components, the same applies to sustainability of FAIR, which is not just a matter of cost. And I invite now Vanessa Proudman, Director of SPARC Europe, and Pierre Mounier, Opera's coordinator, to discuss about this. So Vanessa is the Director of SPARC Europe and has 20 years of experience work with international university libraries, worldwide research institution foundation, and policymakers. While Pierre Mounier is the coordinator of the OPERAS, the European Research Infrastructure for the Development of Open Scholarly Communication in the Social Science and Humanities community, and Associate Director of OpenEdition and co-director of the Directory of Open Access Books. Welcome both, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you very much for the invitation, and it's great, Pierre, that you are joining us today. This is supposed to be a fireside chat. It's a little bit light for a fireside, but let's just imagine sitting around a fire talking about those important topics that somehow never go away, and that's financial sustainability of open science. So Pierre and I, we go back a while, and I think since we met, we've been talking about this topic. And it's still very current. I just wanted to start though, Pierre, before we get going. Firstly, saying how proud I've been to be part of this, part of the FAIRsFAIR project. And you've really developed so much guidance and standard setting for the FAIR community to help so many actors in the future implement FAIR, right? So what's at the very core of FAIRsFAIR is that you want what you have created to be reused and sustained. This is so vital. And, you know, we heard, I think today and yesterday, over 170 uploads on Zenodo. You've got guidelines, templates, training, stories, codes, technical tools. So how are we going to financially sustain some of those essential outputs? Because you have developed them so that a community can implement FAIR much more effectively. So we really don't want that to go to waste. And I think what's also really commendable is that all of the software that you've developed has gone on to GitHub, and that all of your documents are also CC BY licensed and deposited on Zenodo, so for all. So I think that's really brilliant. But I think some of the bigger challenges are some of those outputs, some of the software, some of the tools like FAIRaware or Fuji, or the Re3Data repository finder. So potentially very interesting services still need to be further tested, explored. But, you know, in the future, these could be really valuable elements of the FAIR ecosystem. So it's really important that we think about how we financially sustain them. I'll give you a minute in a second. I also really want to say how important this is, that we as a community keep control of the things that we have created, so that we safeguard our research outputs and what we've created through in our projects. And it's also about growing and keeping a healthy community-owned infrastructure alive. And we can do that by collectively funding, contributing to the tools and services that we've developed. We don't need to depend necessarily on the commercial sector to take this forward. We can also safeguard and financially sustain it. So now I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about how we do that. But Pierre, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Vanessa. One thing which is a little bit striking for me is that, in fact, when we discuss the FAIR principles, there is a common point between the FAIR principles, and which is at the same time quite of maybe a limitation, because the FAIR principles are almost about the ability, you know, the ability of the data to be findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. But in fact, this is the preparation of something that we want to actually take place, which is the data not only findable, but actually found, actually accessed, actually interoperated, and actually reused, in fact. So the question I have is how can we go beyond the ability of the data to be fair, but also how they can be actually found, reused, etc. And that's where I think there is this strong relationship or articulation between the FAIR principles and the open science infrastructures, because the open science infrastructures are the concrete mean by which you have the data actually found, reused, and so on. So that's very important to link the two dimensions and let's say the two topics, the FAIR principles on one side and the open science infrastructures on the other side. And sometimes there is a tendency to disconnect the two topics, whereas they are really embedded into each other. That's really important, I think. But once again, when we talk about open science infrastructure, and that's what we have been talking together for a long time, Vanessa, it's about the sustainability of those open science infrastructure. You know, this is the hot topic. Everyone is talking about that. Everyone is discussing the sustainability of those infrastructures. But once again, sustainability is about an ability to be sustained. So in fact, what we want concretely is those infrastructures not only to be sustainable, but to be sustained, actually, not to fall apart and to continue deliver the service that everyone is relying on. So I think that for let's say to move forward in our discussion, I think it would be interesting to discuss about the concrete ways by which those tools, those technologies, those infrastructures can be and are and will be concretely sustained to deliver the service that we need. And of course, you have a strong experience in that yourself, Vanessa, in SPARC Europe with the SCOS program. So because the SCOS program is mainly about that, I understand. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that question.
Yes, sure. I'm just putting the link in the chat, but before I talk about that, so yeah, so what you're saying, of course, Pierre, is to sustain, we actually need to know how, and we need to have actors. So what we wanted to do, so in our adventure to try to move this forward and to get people to step up and actually contribute, also in very small ways, to contribute to financially sustain open science infrastructure. We did a survey in 2020 asking infrastructures, most of them were not the large EOSC infrastructures, but many services and infrastructures upon which we depend, about their financial health and about their who funds them and who's most important. So it was actually quite enlightening. So firstly, some of them, so just going back to what they said, the most important funders of infrastructure and services are national governments. The second one was the EC. The third one was membership fees, and then you came in-kind contributions. We heard about the role and the importance of institutions, not only containing the researchers and the users, but also institutions who are continuing to sustain, maintain some of their project outputs. And then there are others who also ask for service fees. Now, the worrying thing, so I think the national government is not a surprise to many of us, and EOSC, of course, is very dependent on that and will be going forward. But the EC, so almost 50% of our survey respondents also said that their operational deficits were covered by grants. right? So which means, imagine they did not have this project funding. Isn't this something that we should be really worried about? We're all dependent on those funds, and we're very grateful to those funds, and we wouldn't be here today if we didn't have those EC funds. But if we're thinking about sustaining something which has proven its value over time, and we are dependent on insecure or temporary funding, that does sometimes keep me awake at night, you know, when I think about some core infrastructures that are so essential. And so when we're designing some of these infrastructures going forward, it's so important to think early on about which partners, how could we sustain going forward. So I also think, and one of the conclusions of the survey, some of those lessons is, what's really key is that infrastructures need to diversify their funding portfolio. It's hard because often these infrastructures, they run on 4 or 5 people or even less, right? And then you have to look for funding from not only EU funding, and you know what a nightmare that can be, but you know, think about membership fees, think about different models. You go and speak to your research funders, to your national governments. So that's like a hard work for some of these smaller infrastructures, but that's unfortunately the world that we live in right now. But there is something, so you asked me to talk about SCOS. I don't only talk about SCOS, but I would like to talk about SCOS again today. So we also, a group including so Science Europe, European Research Council, the EC, LIBER, ourselves, and other very large library consortia. So don't underestimate the power of libraries in sustaining open science infrastructure. So a number of us and libraries came together to set up a system that recommends essential infrastructure that needs financial support. So they send us applications every year. So a group of us who know the open science community, who know the value, know the needs of our communities, and we ask the broad community to contribute through crowdfunding, donations, or membership fees to help a select few of infrastructures to help them on that journey to sustainability. It's not a permanent, to permanently fill that gap, but it's to help them on that way for 3 years. So we were established in 2017 and we've helped raise 3.5 million from across the globe. We are absolutely thrilled, and so many libraries have stepped up. And we're also seeing a change. There are libraries now who are consistently, year on year, contributing funds, not just to journal publications, but they are also seeing that they depend on some of these infrastructures. So they are also contributing €1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 on an annual basis to honor really important infrastructure. Now, the exciting thing is that at the end of last year, we re-looked at the program. We had a survey to find out whether we're still valuable, and we asked the community, what types of infrastructure should we be promoting and needs funding? And the exciting thing is that the new call, which is out, is looking. We want open research data infrastructure and services. Hello, this is you. Right, so the deadline is at the end of February. So we would like to invite people to, if you are reasonably mature service and you're struggling with funding and you are important in this ecosystem, then please do reach out and apply. And if you're one of the lucky few, we may help promote you to the community for funding. Now, Pierre, I think a bit later, so we knew each other, we've known each other, I don't know for how many years, but several years after that, you also kind of joined the SCOS family somehow. And I'd like you to also tell us a bit about an example of an infrastructure that was supported by SCOS, but not only SCOS being a supportive mechanism for financial sustainability. It would be great if you could tell us a bit more about your story there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about the directory of open access books, which was part of the second round, if I'm correct, of the SCOS campaign. So for me, the DOAB is it's a good example of one of those open science infrastructures that support the FAIR principles, more particularly, for example, the F here, because we support the findability, and in fact, we help open access books to be found by users, by researchers, by the public, and by all the readers. Through directly the platform, the open access book, the directory of open access book, but also through the catalogs of our partners, the libraries with whom we are working hard to make the books discoverable. So this is one of the examples of those open science infrastructures that serve the FAIR principles in a way for open access books this time. And now there is the question of the sustainability of this open science infrastructure. So you're right to say that, of course, the SCOS participating to the SCOS campaign helps us a lot to what you call our journey towards sustainability, which is a nice expression, mainly by helping us establishing more permanent relationship with the community, and more particularly with the libraries, because you know, the SCOS participating to a SCOS campaign for an infrastructure is not the end of it. It's the start of a process where, thanks to the SCOS campaign, we start establishing permanent relationship and a partnership with the community and the libraries. So that's one part of this sustainability of DOAB. But that's not the only one, because when you have a look at how at the story of the DOAB itself, you see that, for example, the directory of open access book was a spin-off service, first developed by a foundation, so the OpenEdition Foundation. And that's, I think we must credit Elko Verwerda and Ronald Snyder particularly to have developed these new services from within the OpenEdition Foundation in the first instance. But then after several months and years, trying to find other partners in their environment to support the development of this service and to support the sustainability of the service. And that's where the institution I'm working for, primarily OpenEdition, which is the French national infrastructure for open scholarly communication in SSH, struck the partnership with OEPEN to participate and to provide support and participate in the development of the DOAB, adding another partner to support the development of this infrastructure. With ourselves, the support of the French Ministry of Research, for example, who gave us specific funding to support this infrastructure, with the support of our overarching institutions, so CNRS and Aix-Marseille University, for example. So that's interesting to see. For me, it's let's say it's a good example of the rule that says that sustainability can be obtained by the addition of multiple sources, multiple types of support of different kinds. So for me, it's not enough to have the support of the ministry, because you said the ministries are important. Yes, they are important, but they are not enough, because their support need to be complemented by the support coming from the community. So the libraries themselves, the research performing organizations and the universities, and of course the funding agencies such as the European Commission in that case, or it can be the national funding agencies or the charities and so on. So just the conclusion of what I want to say by this concrete example is that for me, sustainability is obtained and achieved by a partnership of different stakeholders working together in their own capacity with their own limitation to support an infrastructure and then a service that make possible the implementation of those FAIR principles that we are talking about. So it's all about community, it's all about multi-stakeholder involvement and partnership, and it's all about nurturing an ecosystem, in fact, where the different stakeholders and partners work together in the same direction.
Completely agree, as I always do when I chat to you. I think I'd just like to say a couple more things just at the end about something that I think would be really important for us all to think about and perhaps do and to take action. So firstly, we need to be more aware about the costs of what we're doing. So when the project ends and we want to take things forward, it's really important to try to administer, monitor the costs, because funders, they want to know that. And many of us are at institutions and we don't think about that. So thinking a little bit more about what those costs are, I think would be really helpful going forward. And also, you know, libraries, they also want to know, you know, the same. And also, I think we can also build more capacity by having more of these conversations, by sharing some of those business model stories, so that we have more in our rucksack as infrastructures, and that we know what other models can work, what new opportunities are there, and also talking to research funders and others who perhaps are not as used to contributing to open science infrastructure yet. Yeah, so there's heaps that we can still do. Do join us. We've got a workshop tomorrow morning. Some of you are coming, and we will talk more about the FAIRsFAIR specific outputs. But yeah, I could always talk about this for hours, and we only had 15 minutes Pierre today, but we'll continue next week live in Paris, I'm sure. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for the invitation again. Yes.